All right, I believe we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is the second installment of our Educators versus VR series. And today we're going to learn lessons from the next frontier in education. I'm joined by Yuki, Laura, and Brad, all amazing pioneers who are going to share their experiences. My name is Christophe Mallet, and I'm your host today. I'm also the CEO of Body Swaps. It's not about body swaps, but nonetheless, I'm going to tell you the origin story of this webinar. A few months back, we had a workshop with our partners in education, so 10 partners from around the world, FE, HE, to obviously discuss body swaps and our roadmap and our features. And very quickly, we realized that they were all educators trying to do the same stuff, but in slightly different ways. And organically, everyone started sharing tips and war stories. Everything from how do you convince the reluctant staff member to put on a headset? What software do you use when you need to monitor 6 students at the same time? How do you create psychological safety in a classroom? So all of this very tangible, very applicable tips. And so we thought, well, it's a shame that this is going to stay in this private Zoom. So that's why we're here today. It's really to share lessons from those who are trying new stuff. It's from educators, for educators, but not only. I know a lot of you here are working in the VR industry as well, on the hardware side or on the software side. And so it's also to listen to kind of the real challenges on the ground and what we need to build for the future. So what are we going to do today? We're going to start with 3 15-minute quick case study, starting with Brad. So Brad is in Brisbane, Australia, where it's 4:02 a.m. So we're going to have to keep him awake. And Brad is scaling nursing with XR around the world. Then we'll go to Laura in Paris, who is going to talk to us about trying to deploy VR in 13 campuses and for 12,000 students. Not an easy feat. And finally, Yuki in Stanford, California, talking about the virtual people class, which was delivered almost entirely in VR, and what she learned there. But before we start, to quickly contextualize the discussion, I picked those 3 photos. It's obviously a caricature, but that's to say that a lot has happened in the past 24 months in education. And if you boil it down, there's been 2 big things: COVID, obviously, and the metaverse. So COVID accelerated or forced the digitalization of education. It showed its power, but also its limits. And the need for human connection, the need for experiential learning, and also created almost existential crisis to reimagine what it means to learn. And then you have the metaverse. So the metaverse is not built, but it's now a term in the mainstream. And that reflects how much the immersive technologies have progressed for learning. On the hardware side, it's more affordable, it's more user-friendly. I remember back in 2016, I needed 3 suitcases to carry my HTC Vive around. But also the software, there's hundreds of amazing applications for education, and more importantly, hundreds of initiatives around the world to make those work. So the question is not whether VR is going to become a modality in learning, it's a question of when and how, and more importantly, why. So let's hear it today from our panelists who are going to try and answer those questions. And firstly, I would like to bring in Brad. Brad, you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, morning, evening, whatever it is. I am here, ready to rock and roll.
Fair enough. So Brad, before you start, quick intro. A few months ago, we had a chat, and when you opened the Zoom, I found you lying on your hospital bed ahead of an ankle surgery. And obviously you had a VR headset on the bedside table. So I asked you why, A, you were in the hospital, and B, why you had a VR headset. And you told me that you were going to teach a class to Korean students in Engage remotely from your bed. So that's, I think, a pretty good description of how proactive Brad is and how great stories he has. Brad is a trained nurse, been deployed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Norway, Mexico, and right now is trying to take XR as a means to improve how nursing nurses are educated around the world. So I'm going to give you the floor right now, Brad, and remove myself so you can speak freely.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah, so thanks for the intro. I think Chris has summed it up pretty well. I'm a nurse. I've been around the traps. I lived in London for 8 years. At the time, I did work in and out of academia as a lecturer. I also taught advanced life support. So I spent a lot of my nursing career at the front of a classroom. And I think that concept of the architecture of the room is really important. What you perceive that teaching, the transfer of knowledge in a physical environment, what that is in your zeitgeist is what I try and flush away. Not because I just want to go against the grain, but obviously the technology drives that, which is great. So we do teach nurses in Korea, we teach them in India, and I usually teach them off my back deck. I live in Nusa, it's right near the rainforest and near the beach, so I do quite like where I live. But the technology obviously allows us to collaborate. And this metaverse term, I'm sure it's irritating to most people that it's now at the forefront, when actually I've been using collaborative VR to teach students globally for over 2.5 years. So it's definitely not a new term. It's just being thrust upon us. And whether that's good or not, we can argue about that later. Next slide, please, Chris. And video one, Chris.
James from The Illusionist. I'm the inventor. Watch close. A lot of people think you need very quick hands to do magic. It's not true. The best magic is slow and deliberate with your sleeves rolled up. A quarter. Give it a little squeeze. And it vanishes. Another squeeze and it comes right back.
Thanks, Chris. That's Kevin James from a group called The Illusionists. I think magic is interesting. Magic in the classroom is interesting. I call it the sizzle. So it's kind of like my trademark term, whether you like steak or not, whether you soy sauce and garlic, when something first hits the pan that you love and you get that sizzle, there's that, ooh, this is going to be good. That moment in teaching, you can see it in the learner's eyes and you can feel it in their voice, is that they get it or they're leaning into it exponentially, so much so that as a teacher, you just become a facilitator. That's what we really try and aim for. And that's how we try and use the technology, is that pedagogically, we're weaponizing the technology to transfer knowledge. So this is my company. I started it about 3 years ago. Chris said I'm a nurse, still work clinically as a nurse today. Not like a lot of other people that are leaving the workforce in droves, but this type of technology is supportive. So we've broken the business into two elements. We try and supply knowledge and we try and deliver skills. Essentially, we've built a custom learning management system whereby we can deploy with our partnerships around 12 different virtual reality applications, which are off the shelf, nothing intrinsic. All comes back to a learner dashboard that has machine learning. So we can show learning over time. We put that into knowledge. So we do lectures in VR, as Chris said. So I teach Korean nurses, but it's not didactic as you know it. For example, if I was teaching, we're just building a session at the moment around mouth care. Now, the lecture is actually in an absolutely huge mouth, and we can walk around the mouth. So the classroom is the context. And obviously 3D visualization is interesting because you're not just looking at a model. You have to have some pedagogical application around, well, if I'm teaching a student about a stroke, I can show them the cardiovascular system of the brain, but that doesn't teach them about what a stroke is. So that play that you have around the 3D model, whereby you can build the transfer of knowledge, is the exciting part. We really focus on the sizzle. At the moment, we've got a contract with Ohio State University in the US. I helped train their nursing professors in understanding the technology, and we work with an Australian company, a non-for-profit care flight, around CPR first aid training. So they're sort of a $100 million Australian company, huge brand here in Australia. So we're having some traction, which is great. We also have other partners in India, Korea, Sri Lanka, etc. Next page. So this is a pic from one of our classes in Korea. Daegu Science University is definitely our stronger partner over there. The students absolutely love it. We usually finish off with the gorillas in satin burns as a finisher. And we generally teach things like respiratory assessment, cardiology. So focused curricula really is what we do. We also have a large contract with Queensland Health up here in Queensland. They have 30 headsets across 10 hospitals. So they actually do simulations, things like advanced life support. So high functioning teams that are distributed across 500-600 kilometers, pop a headset on, and they actually work on a patient together. So what we're really trying to do is delete geography and provide meaningful remote solutions. In the meantime, we try and manage liability, scalability. So within our business, we're really passionate about providing innovation that's accessible. So, for example, if there was a maternity unit in Tanzania that wanted to learn and improve their maternity standards around life at birth, if we train those nurses and we can improve their skills, then we can improve the survival birth rate. Then that has an impact. So I'm definitely not a money-hungry founder looking to get an exit from a big VC within sort of a year. You know, we have a big impact portfolio around how we see this can actually help healthcare standards. Next slide, please, Chris. Now, Chris leaned into this at the beginning. Obviously, the industry demand is borderline nauseating. Most of it's, like I said, annoying. I'm not an angry person, but I hate the marketing and virtual reality, even though I work in it. It is outrageous. Some of the research that comes out, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is just gross. There's no external validity. There's very little research rigor around the products. Usually the cohorts are really small. So that becomes problematic, because when does innovation become adopted? You know, in healthcare, it's extremely frustrating because people say, oh, you know, there's not really any research that this works. And I'm like, but it's innovation. How can you not pick up something new and just give it a go and then measure it and then incorporate it over time? And then there's this wrestle around, well, what's innovation and what's research, and how do you build research to innovation? But that's my problems. I have problems, but I can deal with that. There's an academic demand because, you know, there is evidence showing that this is good. This is a good thing to implement. There is definite problems. You know, we've got cyber sickness, we've got shame. I find in a classroom, putting someone up in front of other people in a headset, there's a level of this sort of social shame that you have to be very wary of. And even if you're on Zoom and you're using a headset and then you collaborate in VR, people are very worried, obviously, about looking silly. And you, as a teacher, you have to navigate that and use your articulation of process very carefully. And obviously the nursing demand. I don't know if you've seen the news and heard this thing called COVID, but, you know, there's a lot of nurses that are at the bedside that essentially are in a war that they never asked to be in. And a lot of these nurses are mums who just want to look after their kids. But next minute they're dealing with, you know, thousands of dying people a day and, you know, 16-hour shifts in PPE. So being able to provide something engaging and meaningful to the nursing workforce is exciting. Next slide, please. Oh, pedagogy. Oh, this is so interesting. So this is what I love about what I do. And I put on a headset and I think sometimes, like, how did I even get to this point? You know, I have worked in Mosul, Iraq, in the ISIS fight. I was in Afghanistan. I've worked in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And you just think, how does a nurse end up doing this for a living? But it's the sizzle. It's watching people get it. And, you know, we're just at the beginning of this. This hasn't even started yet. So these three things: creativity, innovation, and change. You know, innovation and change are probably synergistic, but it's giving something a go that's worth it. You know, that's just keep it like as lay as possible and just saying, do you know what? This shit's actually really interesting. And yeah, definitely got its downsides. And the amount of annoying time I've spent trying to connect a headset to Wi-Fi, or like Chris said, I was lugging around a Vive for a year, and I could have thrown that thing in the river about 100 times because they are so annoying. But in 2 years, they've come so far, and now it's so functional. I'm definitely not going to say I'm a fan of the Quest, but hardware is just a whole nother entity. But the pedagogy, setting up a classroom, setting up a lesson plan or a lesson shape to deliver an experience, that's really what we're trying to do, is get learners to experience a skill, practice it, and have that knowledge transfer. Next slide, please. Video 2.
My goodness, don't you remember when you went first to school? You went to kindergarten. And in kindergarten, the idea was to push along so that you could get into first grade, and then push along so that you could get into second grade, third grade, and so on, going up and up. And then you went to high school, and this was a great transition in life. And now the pressure is being put on. You must get ahead. You must go up the grades and finally be good enough to get to college. And then when you get to college, you're still going step by step up to the great moment in which you're ready to go out into the world. And then when you get out into this famous world comes the struggle for success in profession or business. And again, there seems to be a ladder before you, something for which you're reaching all the time. And then, suddenly, when you're about 40 or 45 years old in the middle of life, you wake up one day and say, huh? I've arrived. And by Jove, I feel pretty much the same as I've always felt. In fact, I'm not so sure that I don't feel a little bit cheated. Because you see, you were fooled. You were always living for somewhere where you aren't. And while, as I said, it is of tremendous use for us to be able to look ahead in this way and to plan, there is no use planning for a future, which when you get to it and it becomes a present, you won't be there. You'll be living in some other future which hasn't yet arrived. And so in this way, one is never able actually to inherit and enjoy the fruits of one's action. You can't live at all unless you can live fully now.
Thanks, Chris. So I put that video in. That's Alan Watts, a bit of a thinker, a few decades back. But if we don't live fully now, if we don't explore the things that are in front of us, working in healthcare is such a barrier in terms of innovation and understanding how new technologies can impact in a healthcare setting. But really enjoying each moment, because this is also about attention and where we lay attention within the classroom as a teacher, and the attention of the student, and that attention should be in the moment, which I think leads towards the value proposition, because that's the most interesting part of this technology is where is the attention laid, and how long is that concentration applied for, but to what? These are all the challenges as educators we're going to have. I'm going to have to zip through this. So essentially, we're building nursing library modules, all in VR with challenging pedagogy. Obviously, it's accessible learning. It's this concept. This is a trademark term we're looking at, is alive, is avatar-led learning. So pushing e-learning out the door, as a nurse on night shift, clicking through some crappy video, doing some compliance training is just, I don't even know why that stuff even exists. But trying to make e-learning something more, because at the moment, whatever it is not good. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where I live, on the road in the busy street between academia and corporate industry. Now, I hear this all the time. Let's just do a pilot and see how it goes. But I think we probably should just put a little bit of fuel under that word pilot and light it up and just watch it disappear, because a pilot is like non-commitment. Now, that's not coming from me from a sales perspective. It's just coming from an area where you're going to buy a headset and you're just going to sit it on the shelf and it's going to get dust. because there's no skin in the game to see how you can push the envelope to make a serious adaptation to your workflow. Particularly in healthcare, when people will easily spend $150,000 on a mannequin, but not $500 on a VR headset. It's an interesting area, and looking at commercialization, which is the dirty word, is where I think we should be, because that's where innovation makes an impact. Next slide. Okay, so I think the next step is data. You know, I look at some of these healthcare apps and collaborative VR, and there's just an absence of accessible data compared to what we use on video. I don't know why, but it's true. We've got a machine learning-based learning management system, but we struggle to get any new type of data into that ML for change. And obviously external validity around research application needs to be applied. So we're looking at setting up centers of excellence from nursing and even healthcare. You know, I don't think the docs are on this quite yet. So we're looking to build centers of excellence globally and build in research pathways and try and validate some of the ideas that not just me, but companies similar to us are doing out there in the world. Next slide, please. We might just skip this video, Chris, just for time, but this is a selective attention video. It's a concentration test around things like psychological affordance, you know, what we can afford in a space, and the challenges that educators have in a classroom. So we can ask a few questions about that at the end of the panel. Next slide. And that's me. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I tried to do a bit of a summary, but a bit of a different approach. Thanks, Chris.
Brad, thanks a lot for that. I wasn't expecting having an existential crisis during this class, but the Alan Watts video is really eye-opening, and I think this idea of making learning alive, not for the sake of engagement, but just for the sake of it being an enjoyable experience in and of itself, is a fantastic lesson. I am now going to kick you out of the stream very rudely and hope that you can stay awake. So speak to you in half an hour, Brad. Thanks a lot. All right. And instead, please welcome Laura. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Hi, I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant. So quick intro. So we work with Laura and the IMT with body swaps, but that's not about this today. Laura leads the virtual reality focus group at the IMT. So the IMT is Institut Mines Télécom. As you can hear, I'm French. There's 13 schools, 12,000 students, mostly engineering and business as well. And amongst her many missions, what Laura does is not only try a new VR app without the commitment, as Brad pointed out, but going a little bit deeper and to say, it's great to have good content, but it's far from enough. How do we make things work on the field? How do we train the teachers? How do we communicate? How do we make sure learners are happy? So that's a hell of a job, and I'm sure you're going to tell us all about it. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So as you said, I work for Institut Mines Télécom, so I had planned on introducing it, but you did it very well for me. Can everybody see my screen? So that
no, we cannot see if you're sharing your screen, we cannot see it at the moment.
Okay, well, it's supposed to be working right now. Well, anyway, let me try that again. So I work at IMT in the lead innovation area.
Yes, I'm going to add it in. All good?
There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. So as Chris said, I work at Institut Mines Télécom. So there are 8 schools in Institut Mines Télécom throughout France. We have more schools that are associated and affiliated. And what's important to know is that although we have a certain amount of schools, we even have more campuses, and that will be relevant afterwards. So I work in educational transformation, and as Chris said, I coordinate a work group that's on virtual reality. That's called RAVI, and it's virtual and augmented reality for educational innovation. So basically, we've got people from each school in that group. And so, of course, we deal with everything that's equipment-wise, but we also have our goals that are to share together our experiences to monitor new technologies, equipment, software, user cases, to identify what could be useful for our teachers in our different areas, to test them, to create also some experiences ourselves, some immersive escape games, serious games, or 360 immersive visits. We try to train also our co-workers and teachers to new technologies, accompany them and support them, and especially neutralize what we do, because each school and each campus has different human and materialistic resources, and so it's very enriching to see what everybody can bring to the table. So today I'm going to focus on Reverto, because Reverto, which is a French startup who helped us create an experiment to sensitize our students, first-year students, to sexual harassment and sexist behavior, because that has been quite an issue in France and I think throughout the world. So they helped us build, and they built Consent, which is a 360-degree experience composed with 2 quizzes and 360 video, plus afterwards a very much needed debrief session. And what happened is that project was done outside of my focus group. But when we got to know that it was existent, we were quite aware of the impact it would have on our students, because it's immersive reality. And on the other hand, it's a topic that can be very difficult for some people. And, you don't know how people are going to react. Plus, it was a very, very big project, because all our students first year represents about 3,000 students. And we weren't used to doing so much in such a short amount of time. So just so that you can visually see, unfortunately, the trailer is in French, but just so you see a few images, and I will walk you through it. So basically, you are in the skin of a female student called Leah. And as you will see in this video, she is in different situations throughout the video. She can be in class, she can be at a school party. This is the last scene where you don't really know what happened, but probably something that shouldn't have. And throughout the video, you see different situations that she's going to be exposed to. And it's very interesting, because with the quiz at the beginning and at the end, you kind of take the temperature of what the students know. And at the end, that's a very important visual right here. You have quizzes, and you have a pyramid, and they learn also about the law and about everything that they should know about the consequences that they could encounter if they're in that kind of situation. So the calendar was very much of an issue, because between the moment the experience was ordered to be made and that it was implemented in our schools, it was only 6 months. 6 months, and we were told that per session we would be having about 12 students. That's what was recommended, which on one hand was very little when you've got 3,000 students who need to do this experience. But on the other hand, we didn't have enough headsets yet in every school or each campus. So we needed to do an upgrade on that matter. And when you say you need an upgrade and to buy new headsets, you also need to do the setup, the updates and everything. So that was quite a challenge. And the team to set it in place also, because there wasn't one particular team. And although the members of Ravi are there, to offer support and to accompany, it's not their primary mission to just be about VR in their schools. So it was really interesting to see how each and every school organized itself and who came together. And I have to mention that the students also have been really amazing, because not only did they help co-write the whole experience so that it would be close to what they know from their life on campus, but they also helped in sort of coordinating things in their schools, because some are part of associations, students associations. So they sometimes did it after their working hours or studying hours in the evening, because the thing is that we wanted students to be trained or sensitized before around September, because all the parties that you have at the beginning, especially in the engineering schools, can have a lot of alcohol, and that's when you want people to be aware of those kinds of issues. Otherwise, you kind of feel like it's a bit too late. So we had to be quite quick. And so the question of when and where, because it's not during, not obviously in every school during studying hours, and you need to have also the rooms to do it. And speaking of which, this is just an example. I can get back into detail later, but it's just to show those are two examples from two different schools. On the left, school A, let's say, and on the right, school B. And although they both had two rooms, and both had 4 people, supervising, they did it different ways. Some of them did a parallel, where they had all the learners, so the 12 learners, for the brief, the 360 experiment, and then the debrief session as well. And then you've got all the cleaning issue that I'll comment on later. And then that starts again. So you do it once, you clean, and then you start again. And on the other hand, that was, they would go and have the technical experiences in one room, and then they would go to another for the debrief session. Meanwhile, they would clean the first one, room 1, and then so on and so on. So I try to color it so it would be a bit more understandable. But basically, you see the idea of the sliding rather than being just with one person. And it's important to have 2 people, because if one of them doesn't feel very well during the experience, you need to have an adult or someone that's going to be able to come out of the room with them and not let them by themselves going outside. Like, that's very important. So the challenges and difficulties that we encountered, so other than the calendar that I said, and knowing who would be supervising those sessions, where to do them, charging everything that's logistical, because you'd think it's about, so we have 14 headsets per campus now. Some of them have even more, have between 25 and 30. But you really have to know how you're going to deal with all of this, moving in from one place to another. And it gets very real very quickly. So all the setup and updates, even just installing the app inside of the helmet, the headset, doing the updates. Then once you're in the session, doing not having the video streams, because we were at that point where we can't see what they see. So you've got to guide them. You've got to know the thing and say, okay, well, you see this, click that, which can be quite time consuming, which is a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. And also the Guardian. So that could be, could make you waste a bit of time at the beginning when you're setting everything up. And of course, the context, as Brad said, if you've heard the news and know a bit about what's going on. So all the cleaning, and that also the very real situation, because when you're with 360 experiences, you want to have the sound just to yourself, so you don't hear what's going on the other side. But then lots of students now, they either have Bluetooth headphones, or they have something that's not compatible with the headset. So you lend some, but then you've got to clean them. And although it seems like a detail, when you've got several students and you're on a time schedule, it can be quite time consuming. So in the tips and solutions that I thought about bringing up, you have the briefing, because we always talk about, okay, so that's, you've got the experiences and then the debrief. But what happens before, when they discover all the equipment, when you have to explain also, especially for that topic, sexual and sexist behavior and harassment. that you really need to not throw them into the experience and explain things and say, you have a choice. You can skip, that's part of the Revertal product. You can skip the part where the film is, and you can just have the quiz and come back to some situations, but you don't have to do all of it if you don't feel like it. To be completely free to take the headset off and to walk out if you want to. Also to have a computer available so that people who don't want to be completely immersed, because it can be very disturbing. You're not in control when you're in a 360 environment. Like you can't move, you can only even see your hands. So it's not for everyone, and you've got to respect that. That's my feeling anyway. Deactivating the Guardian, which can seem very, very, basic, but not everybody knows that you can do it. And I've put that here, Grove XR, because that's in the United States. I mean, I think it's available in France, but we're not using that. But that's very useful for everything that's helping with the video streams, seeing what the learners see, and also starting the application, stopping it, and just knowing what's going on and not being outside of it. So you're there with the students, and of course everything that's on the sanitary side. So having the masks, because we were in a situation where you had to keep the masks on. So one of our teachers came up with a tip of some tape that the special medical tape that you put on the nose so that you don't have fog in your headset. So there's quite a thing around that. Clean box as well to clean the headsets with UVC lights. And I have also to say that France Immersive Learning, just to say, because we're going to try case with them in the upcoming months, and they've been quite a support. It's an association that regroups different actors from the different areas, but all included in the immersive technologies and user cases. So they've been a big help in discovering new things, in giving us advice as well. So I thought it would be nice to mention them. And so to finish, I think this experience has had a very positive impact. First on the students, because a lot of them could try when they couldn't before. And also it was aimed to be for first year students, and in the end second year and third year have asked to do it. So in some schools they're already doing it, which was not part of the plan, but that helps increase the numbers of users. Decision makers as well, to prove them that it could be done, because in lots of places, some of them may be a bit wary about that kind of thing to put in place, but that was a very good example to show them what we're capable of. Employees and HR, because for example, Reverto has other products that HR is actually has already put on the catalog, so that employees could benefit as well from HR training. And we've also tried, this is a mixed reality training session for first aid movements. That's not well said, but basically you are with a mannequin and in a situation, and it was a very, very nice experience. Teachers also, of course, because if they try more, then that's a bridge that's already crossed. And the members of our work group, because it's been such a larger scale that we've had to be more efficient, and that I think everybody grew. And some of us that didn't have that much experience, that knew and weren't in the work group but didn't do it as much on the field, now have, and the support behind has been very, very important. So there you go. That's it. I don't know how I am on time, but I am now.
You did very well. That's perfect. Thanks a lot, Laura. It was really, really fantastic.
You're very welcome.
Brilliant. I'm now going to do the same and kick you out and welcome Eugy, but see you in 15 minutes on the YouTube chat. So we're going to have a Q&A. If you have any questions for Laura, for Brad, or for Eugy, please put them there. We're going to select a few and we'll cover them live. So speaking of you, Laura, thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey, Eugy.
Hello. Hi.
How are you? Quick intro before you start, if that's all right. So you probably all remember, if you were here, the third image on my slide with a screenshot of a Zoom panel and a lot of students with a headset on. That was from the Virtual People course that is taught at Stanford University. Eugy works with Professor Jeremy Bailenson at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, and they delivered that kind of truly groundbreaking class. Eugy is a PhD student. I mean, she does some very in-depth research, and her topic is virtual embodiment, having digital identities, and how that transforms the cognitive processes. So today she's going to talk about that Virtual People class, but also her research. I'm going to bring your slides in and leave you the floor.
Awesome. Yeah. So as Chris introduced, my name is Eugy, and I am a second-year PhD student working with Jeremy at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford. And today I'll be talking a little bit about my insights that I've gained as both a teaching assistant and a research assistant for Virtual People, which was one of the longest and largest classes to ever take place inside social VR. And I know there are a lot of educators in the audience today, and I'm always interested in talking to people who are interested in incorporating VR to any extent into their curriculum. So I left my contact information down there, and that information will also be there at the very end. So if you can reach out, that would be great. So Virtual People, or COM 166-266, is a course taught here at Stanford by Professor Jeremy Bailenson. And it's a pretty large class, around 100 to 200 plus students take it every time it's offered. But usually, historically in the past, the format of the class has been Jeremy would go up and he would deliver a lecture in front of a bunch of people. But with the pandemic, I think a lot of instructors were sort of forced to reimagine what the classroom would look like. And for Virtual People, it made a lot of sense to kind of move the classroom into the very medium it teaches students about, which is VR. So we actually sent an Oculus Quest 2 headset to every single student that was enrolled in the class. So for the summer quarter, we sent around 100, and for fall, which was the most recent edition of the class, we had around 200 students, each with their own headset. So for around 10 weeks, we encouraged them to use the headset to explore different experiences, and we also held class inside VR. And these are sort of the core questions that I think were really important in shaping how we wanted to teach the class and shape the curriculum. So the first one is, what are we trying to teach both inside and outside of VR, and what are the desired learning outcomes? And also, as a follow-up, what needs to be or what must be inside VR in particular? And also, where do we host this class and why? And also, how do we make sure that each student is ready and accommodated? So I'll first focus on the two questions because they're sort of in the same vein. So Virtual People is a class about VR. So Jeremy covers all sorts of topics related to VR. We talk about avatars, we talk about presence, we look at how VR is used in the medical field for sports training as an empathy machine. And so we thought, okay, so what should we put inside VR? Should Jeremy be lecturing inside VR? What will students be doing? So we divided the course into 3 parts. The first one is a panel style lecture where the students would do sort of follow that traditional format of a class where they would do readings, they would do discussion posts, and they would bring their questions to Jeremy and he would elaborate them on a Zoom sort of lecture. And we also had guest lectures as well from people from different expertise within VR. And the second portion is where I guess VR comes in, but this is more of, we had asynchronous and synchronous experiences. The asynchronous experiences were done alone. We would give students experiences to try. So we would say, hey, this week you will try, or we encourage you to try Traveling While Black or 6x9, Clouds Over Sidra. So those were standalone experiences that students tried on their own time. And we would also have synchronous experiences where as a class, we would go together to do things together. So sometimes we would go to Alt Space and we would go on this guided meditation session, or we would have students form groups and they would direct and film a movie or a scene of a movie that they enjoyed. And a bulk of the class was actually taken inside social VR, which I think is what sparks most of the interest. So we were thinking, how do we preserve or make sure that students feel socially connected? Because that is such an important part of students' experiences. So we decided, okay, let's do this inside VR. So we had discussion sections and these creative activities take inside a social VR platform called Engage. And we did this over a course of 8 weeks. So the first week we had them sort of train on how to use the platform, and then we had 8 weeks worth of discussion. So every week students would go inside in small groups of 10 and they would interact with one another, and we would have different topics every week to talk about and also do activities related to. So we were thinking, okay, why does this need to be inside VR? Why shouldn't lectures be inside VR? Is this something, what is something that we can do inside of VR that is not better off in Zoom? So we thought that some of the unique affordances of VR included being able to make use of the creative, being able to make use of the 3D space and the tools that are uniquely available inside VR. So for example, you see an image of a student using the 3D pen to draw, and they could also bring inside 3D models and create their own world. And we also thought that because, as I mentioned earlier, the social component is so important, and VR has been known to make students feel, or make people in general feel present. And by that, I mean physically present, self-present, and also socially present. So if a student is standing next to you, we can feel that they are there with us. And we also feel that the instructor is there in the same space with us. So we thought that was a very attractive feature of VR. And another thing, and I think this is something that excites a lot of VR educators, is being able to do things that are dangerous and possible. And if you've read Jeremy's book, he has this DICE model which basically follows this. So we can go to the moon, we can walk inside the model of a heart, we can go underwater, and really immerse ourselves in environments that would otherwise be impossible to see or replicate in an actual classroom. So this is an example of an assignment that we had. This was one of the final assignments after weeks of doing discussions inside VR. So just to quickly mention, we had around 5 minutes at the beginning where the TA would sort of like go over and debrief what the class material was about, and then we would have a discussion where we would gather around as a circle. Students would talk, students would engage with one another, and at the very in the last 15 minutes, we would have them do a creative activity where we gave them a prompt related to that week's topic, and then we had them do a creative activity. And all that training and I guess like use of VR allowed them to create this final world. So these are some examples of the worlds that students were able to create. And as you can see, they're really diverse. Some people went really abstract. Some people did educational things. Some people created spaces that felt comfortable to them. So we had a wide range of worlds that were built. So the third question is, where do we host this class and why? So as expected, the classroom environment is really important, and where you decide to host your class is going to shape the students' experiences. And we had a lot of great candidates, but there were a lot of things that we wanted to consider because after all, this is a class. We want to make sure that students feel safe, that there's no thing called VR bombing, I guess, which is very similar to Zoom bombing, where a person who's not involved in the class might come and harass everyone. So we wanted to make sure that the platform was secure. And we also wanted to look at what kind of unique affordances that specific platform could provide. So what were the tools that were available, and did they meet our needs and our desired learning outcomes? So that is why we decided to go with Engage, because of all the really cool tools that they provided, like the 3D pen, bringing in 3D models and having a wide range of environments available. And among the other things that we considered were as I mentioned, how many environments are provided and what do the avatars look like? Because avatars are important. After all, they are representing what you look like and what you believe you want to show to other people. So we were thinking about, okay, what are the gender availabilities? Can you control the height? And we just wanted to make sure that students felt represented. So that is something that you should consider when choosing a environment to host your class in. We also obviously thought of interactivity. How much control do people have with their own body, but also with each other and the environment around them? And another thing we considered was sustainability over time and use. So what we did, and this was largely due to the fact that we wanted to make sure that students felt comfortable with using the technology over time. And this is also something that we were interested in studying from a research perspective, which was how do people's use of VR change over time? So do students get bored of being in the same environment all the time? Is this a place that we can sustain multiple classrooms over the course of weeks or months? Another thing we considered was ease of use and accessibility and troubleshooting. So if students get lost, can they find their way back? Do they need extra help? Is this something that they can figure out on their own, or do they need a lot of extra help on? And as I mentioned, we also considered potential VR bombing. And the creative affordances was the last one, and probably one of the most important ones. So the last question is, how do we make sure that all the students feel ready and accommodated? So we had a lot of sort of measures in place to make sure that students didn't have a negative experience. After all, we're teaching about virtual reality. We want them to really familiarize themselves with the technology. We don't want them, ending the class and saying, well, that was horrible. That was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. I hate VR. So we had a lot of measures in place to kind of make sure that this was a really great experience for them. So we had a training at the very beginning of the class. So we had that 1 week where we helped them troubleshoot anything. We, as a whole class, went inside VR together. So each TA, we had around 5 TAs. Each TA sort of took on a group of like 30 people, and we went inside Engage together. And it was pretty, I think, wild in that there were people speaking all at once, people asking, how do I do that? How do you do this? People getting dropped out. But I think this was all great in the learning process of onboarding students. There was also a lot of case-by-case accommodations. I was flooded with, I think, 50 emails per day of students saying, hey, I have a firewall issue, I have a Wi-Fi issue, this battery is not working. So being able to accommodate for each student, just to make sure that they don't feel left behind, because it's really easy to feel left behind given that a lot of students probably don't have experience with VR yet, was important. And another incredibly important thing that we did was we held a Zoom tech support channel for every time students were inside VR. So for the VR journeys, when they were done synchronously, we had a Zoom chat open, and for all the discussion sections. And to kind of, I guess, show you the scale of how large this was, we had 24 sections per week because we had 200 students inside VR. And this is for the fall course. We essentially had 24 Zoom, or not consecutively, but we had them open constantly for like 8 hours per day, where a TA would monitor that channel. So if anyone kind of got dropped out of the VR world, if they got dropped out of Engage, if something happened, they didn't feel lost and they said, okay, well, that's it. I guess like that's the class for me. So they would just jump into Zoom, TA would be there, and they would get the help that they needed. And usually we found that they would be able to go back into VR within a few minutes. And over time, they stopped showing up to the Zoom chat because they were able to figure it out. And another thing was simulator sickness. So one thing to keep in mind, and this is really important when designing the class, is there is a limit to how much VR use students can tolerate, or people in general can tolerate. And that's around 20 to 30 minutes before they start getting simulator sickness. So we wanted to keep that in mind and say, okay, so what is something that we can do within 20 to 30 minutes inside VR, and what are we going to do outside of that time? So planning for both was really important for us. And we made sure that students weren't feeling sick or overwhelmed, because from my personal experience, I've had times when I spent hours inside VR and I would feel nauseous, my stomach would hurt, and I would sweat, and I would have to lie in bed for the rest of the day. We didn't want that happening for students. So we limited the time to 20 to 30 minutes, And anytime, we told the students, anytime you feel sick, or you're starting to feel ill, feel free to take off the headset without any consequences, no questions asked. And we found that, and with research, we know that over time, VR simulator sickness is something that gets better. Another important thing, I think, and a lot of people might be concerned about, is privacy. For us, we used Oculus Quest 2s. And if you're familiar or if you have used a Quest before, you need a Facebook account to log in. And not everyone's going to be comfortable with that. So we were really fortunate to be able to provide fabricated accounts for people who did not want to have a Facebook account associated with this experience, or if they did not have a Facebook account. So providing sort of this avenue for students who have sort of these personal standards or personal desires, we had an avenue for that. And the last thing that was really important was being flexible. And I think this makes sense. And this is something that we've incorporated into Zoom universities as well. But by flexibility, I mean that before the discussion sections took place, we provided a 10-minute window where we said, okay, take this 10 minutes to figure out and troubleshoot anything that you need to do. We had the Zoom session obviously open, and a lot of students would kind of jump into that time and use that 10 minutes to figure out what they needed to figure out technology-wise. Yeah, so to reiterate the 4 questions that sort of, I think, really shaped virtual people into the really great successful class that it was, being able to sustain it for over 10 weeks and for close to 300 students if you combine the fall and summer classes. What were we trying to teach both inside and outside of VR, and what did we want the learning outcomes to be, and what needs to be inside VR was something that we really considered seriously. And where do we host the class and why, and also how do we accommodate students so that they are ready. And I wanted to also quickly say a huge thank you to the group of people that I was able to work with. This was, as Jeremy likes to put it, a Herculean effort. So this is not something that was done by like one person or 2 people. This was done by a huge team of people, each taking on different roles to make sure that this experience was a smooth one. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that I am not only a student and educator, but I'm also a researcher. And one of the projects that I'm working on as a product of this teaching experience was looking at how instructors build VR-based curriculums. So that can be bringing the classroom into VR or bringing VR into the classroom. So if you are an educator who has taught inside VR, I'm working on some research studies related to this. So I would love it if you reach out and email me and we can set up a chat, and I would love to talk to you about your input and insights. And I am also teaching a course about the metaverse here at Stanford in the summer. So your insights will be really helpful in informing how I will plan out that class. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and please reach out.
Thanks a lot, Eugy. This was really, really fantastic and frankly quite impressive what you've been able to achieve. So that's the last of the 3 presentations we had today. So I'm going to bring back Laura and Brad, who is now in the middle of a board, someone's to the chat. We now have a full half hour to have a bit of a Q&A. So we've saved some questions from the chat on YouTube, but please ask some more questions. Rule of thumb: no one speaks more than 90 seconds, including me, so that we can go quick. I have a first questions for you all. Between the Zoom tech support of Eugy, the medical tape for the mask of Laura, and teaching from.
Is Chris frozen in time?
What do you mean?
There he is.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, you've all mentioned very, let's say, unusual things to do for educators. So my question to you is how do you see the role of the educators changing? What are the new responsibilities, but also maybe the new powers? Eugy, just because everything is fresh, do you want to start?
Oh yeah, sure. So I was thinking about this question, and I was trying to think about it from an educator's perspective, but then I thought it might be more helpful to think about it from the student perspective, just because I am also a student. And one thing that I felt really frustrated about as a student was missing out on sort of these chance encounter experiences that exist out of the concrete boundaries of a classroom. So by that, I mean like the bumping into people, the meetings that are unplanned, the meetings that are not part of my calendar. And I was thinking that as educators and sort of pioneers of VR classrooms, we have the power of deciding where the boundaries of a classroom are going to be. So I was thinking of, how do we decide what the encounters can potentially look like, and what are the boundaries and limitations that we want to set out of the classroom? So that was one thing that I think is a really powerful thing educators can do.
So, Brad, because I know you've done a lot of social VR. What's your view on breaking the walls, the social walls?
I think this concept of instructional design in a 20-minute session. I was just saying on the chat, you had simulation sickness, Eugy, there, and I find some people get cyber sickness, no doubt. Refresh rates on devices are getting better, but people still do get that. But the length of time, the honey spot where someone learns, they could be in a headset for 2 hours, but they actually learnt something at 97 minutes. That 97-minute activity could have been the sizzle. That's when they went, I get this. And they could hate the rest of the 2 hours. But we had to get to the 97th minute to do the sizzle. So I think, 20 minutes obviously is the honey spot. But understanding that at the level of attention and concentration in the headset is the key with the instructional design around building every 5 minutes that engagement and the interaction for the learner as a teacher. So you're sort of facilitating a world, right? That's where it's going to be at.
That makes sense. And Laura, so you didn't do a social VR experience, but there was elements of psychological safety that were very important. You pointed out. Do you want to expand on that role for the educator?
Yeah, well, for the new powers and responsibility, may it be with that topic that I exposed today or another, I think that the two keywords to me would be flexible but focused, because you need to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, when you choose the experience, when you build an experience, because we do build experiences also at EMT, and you have to be aware of the student's safety. I think that was very well put by Eugy. But you have to be flexible to people who will say no, who won't want to do the experience, who won't feel good. 2 sessions won't be the same because of the people, because also of the equipment. Sometimes, maybe something's not going to work, and you need to adapt because things are changing a lot. Things are coming out, new equipment, new software. So you just need to be on your feet inside the classroom and outside of it.
Great. I had a complementary question that came on the chat from. Well, I'm gonna show it and make full use of the magic of StreamYard, and that's not just for Eugy. The amount of support needed also for you, Laura, and for some of the stuff you mentioned, Brad, is. How do you see this playing? Is it in the future you're gonna have the educator that delivers the content and the VR tech support? Is every institution going to have a VR tech support team, or is the educator going to become a de facto tech support person?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it's completely doable. I think we had that measure in place just because so many students were super new to VR. So we just wanted to make sure we had that. But I've done other iterations of the class, sort of I guess the pilot, or I don't want to call it a pilot, but before virtual people, where we didn't have tech support and students were still able to learn. Obviously, the first few times there's going to be a lot of trial and error, but I think that's part of any class that goes well, or it doesn't go well, but it's part of any class. So it's completely doable. I think though, if we don't have that technical support in place, really good training from the instructor's end is really valuable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting because, my business, Bundle of Rays, so we're essentially going to be an e-learning business from our learning management system. So where 60% of our content will be recordings on Engage and other platforms such as Facilitate and Roomy. So learners can go in and access these learning recordings with data, and then 30% of that will be live. And we're projecting, one university has around 1,000 nurses, right? So if we start onboarding 10,000 nurses, how many nurses are going to be jumping into VR experiences across the year? And we've talked about this question a lot, is how do we service them and make sure that end user experience is still valuable if they're having some support. But I'll update you in 6 months and let you know how I'm going.
All right, so Do you have something to add, Laura?
Yeah, I'd like to put input for that question, which is a very good question. I agree. It depends, like your technical support, if it's within your institution or outside as well. But I mean, it's very reassuring to have people who know and who are there to comfort you in this new experience that is not like nothing that you've experienced before. And for the teachers, for example, like in our schools, I can say it will depend on their personality. Like some of them are quite tech savvy and they embrace each technology that comes out and they don't mind spending the time like embracing it. And others are a bit more reluctant. So I think on that level, it's also a human issue to, if you make them come on board and if they feel supported, that's what's nice in EMT is that you can have people from other schools and that fill in if they need to.
Great. So that's I guess one challenge is to, and probably a rule of thumb when planning a VR project is to make sure that you allocate the right amount of human resources at least the first time around before anyone gets their grips with VR headsets, which once you know how to use them are easy enough. Apart from the support side of things, have you found any other big challenge that educators here should be aware of? I don't know who wants to jump in first.
There's many. I'll just go really quickly. I think Eugy covered, on her slide, she covered quite important features. I think the one that I mentioned about shame, it's the modality of how you're teaching. Are you in a physical classroom with some headsets and have that face-to-face interaction or guidance, or is it completely distributed learning whereby they're on, like me, where I'm teaching students on another continent? Then obviously that's going to be very different. But I think it all comes down to the preparation. And, someone was asking a question in the chat around, using Unity and having like some level of tech knowledge around programming and coding that comes into content creation, because you can have a platform, but in education, it's going to be about the content. That's what I'm banging on about this sizzle part, the actual learning that happens, the magic, right? And if teachers can get the set organized, then that should be 90% of your job done in VR.
Mm-hmm. Great. Laura, you want to react?
Yeah, I'd say getting people on board, and it also responds to what we were saying previously. It's like you've got some people who don't want to, some who do, but once they try, if they're not in the right, like I had an email even today saying, oh, I've tried it. It was someone that was very proactive. And because the demonstration didn't go as planned and they had a bit of technical problems, then, it's kind of, okay, no, it's not for me. So I think the introduction should be also well thought to the people, to the educators and the ones who are going to, use this technology afterwards. And I would say also a big challenge is finding the experience that works or building it properly, not forgetting the educational purpose and making sure that it fits, because the investment that you're going to make, maybe it financial or in your human resources, needs to be worth it. So I'd say that as well.
Yeah, and those are all really great points. And one other thing that I wanted to sort of add to that was recently I've been talking to a lot of students who are in education, so a lot of PhD students in the School of Education. And from them, I learned that there are so many different types of learning. So really identifying what kind of learning outcome you want for these students is really important. So there's obviously, do you want to do co-design, collaborative based learning? Do you want them to, so something that's more creative? Do you want them to retain a lot of factual information? Do you want it to be an experiential type of learning? So there are multiple different types of learning. So trying to figure out what outcome you want from your class is really important, I think. And also, like I said, thinking about what boundaries might exist in the classroom and outside of it, and trying to see what are the things that students will leave this classroom with, I think is really valuable.
It's almost that we're talking about the reality of immersive learning covers a lot of modalities, and I think between a mostly passive 360 video that has a very high emotional impact and a casual chat in rec room or a CPR listening and engage, those are very, very different ways of using what is ultimately just a medium. But we had this comment on YouTube, and our problem is the content. I see Laura nodding. Is there enough good content out there? What's missing? What do you feel?
Well, I think it's just finding the right shoe, isn't it? It will depend on what you want, really. There are very good things that exist, but I think that in the next few years we'll have a boom of really we're still tiptoeing around for some areas. Some are very well thought, but and also being able to have tools to build your own as well, according to what you need. I think at the beginning of the video, you didn't have maybe as much solutions, and technology just follows, and then they make things available for you. So I think in a few years it will be much easier as well.
You all in agreement?
Yeah, in nursing, it's interesting. There's a race to become like the flight simulator for healthcare. The simulation area of healthcare is really fascinating because you've got like the spectrum of the hierarchy where they're trying to make surgeons happy, which I don't really care about. I love doctors, don't get me wrong, but there's not as many doctors as there is nurses, right? If we can improve nurses, we improve healthcare. So trying to get that simulation content right, but at the moment, there's drop-down menus, and it's not really. It's really good, but it's not really what we want, and then figuring out, trying to find a good soft skills company, Chris, that's challenging.
I really wish there was someone in there who would be able to help you.
And if I may just add as well, you can have a very good experience, but if there's some little thing that doesn't feel right or whatever, it can really get the student out of the experience very quickly, and which is a shame. But so you really need to look at all the aspects of your content, like the user experience and everything.
And to drop the big wolf in a conversation, Facebook or Meta, or however they're called, who have the lion's share of the market and a commitment to developing education for the metaverse, yet don't accept education apps on their store. My question to you is it difficult to find content because there's not enough good content, or is it difficult to find content because it's just not well indexed and organized and distributed and rated?
Everyone wants to play in their own sandbox, right? Like I've even got nursing schools that are building their own internal apps that, because they're at universities, the IP then can't really get commercialized. So there's all these little pockets outside of just Facebook. But it's a nightmare. If you were just walking into virtual reality and you're a new school teacher and you're full of enthusiasm, that enthusiasm is going to be squeezed out of you in about 2 months unless you're resilient. Right? Like you're going to get on the Steam store, you've bought your new Quest 2, you go to download an app, it doesn't work on this headset. And then you're just like, and that starts the ball rolling. I feel for people who are new to the industry, because I've already wasted weeks of my life trying to figure this out, and it hasn't changed, unfortunately.
Okay, well, let's hope the call is heard.
And it's just a challenge after another, right? It's you have one issue because they'll change something, and then you manage to deal with that, and then a few weeks later you have another issue regarding the headset. And we've had that as well, like trying to find solutions. Like we had to invest in one brand of headsets to try and take more or less the same one in each school, so that people who share their experience, there's a whole community, and they know you find solution and you share the solutions. But then you have another experience you want to implement, and then you're like, oh well, I'm going to have to rent some headsets because it's not compatible. And so it just you feel it never ends, but you have no choice. You just have to play the game for now.
I have I guess slightly more optimistic response in that before, just until a few days ago, I was kind of thinking, oh, there's not that much content out there. There's a very limited amount of VR things. And if there are, they're so niche. But I realized that I think if there is more dialogue between different instructors on, oh, this is a resource that you might have never heard of. I think there are pockets of experiences and communities that exist. It's just there's no centralization of these experiences and no place where you can access all of them. They're all, I think, sort of scattered across different platforms, different developers. So I think there are good stuff out there. It's just they're really hard to find unless you kind of hear them through word of mouth. So I think if we kind of get that conversation flowing, and if there's sort of, I guess, like a central point where we can say, okay, this is an experience I'm looking for, and there's people who say, oh, I have an experience for that. That would be, I think, awesome. Because over the past weeks, I've, like I said, been able to talk to a lot of educators in VR, and they've guided me to so many experiences I didn't know even existed. So I think that was, so I'm a bit more optimistic, I think, about that.
I think it's the end to end, because it's obviously not just the content, it's the infrastructure probably that we're talking about. Like, my company's built around platforms like Engage and Facilitate, and which are co-creation platforms, right? You can create whatever you want. So the creation of content probably isn't the crux. It's the infrastructure from end to end, from purchasing your Quest 2 on Amazon or whatever, to then actually absorbing that education. That sphere is the community that needs to pull it apart. Yeah.
Great. There was a question there. Oh, I'm going to find it. That is around costs. So the fact that VR headsets, 6.VR headsets, Quest and Pico and Focus, not to name most, are expensive. Do you find that hardware cost is the main barrier to adoption in your institutions, or it is elsewhere?
I have opinions, but I feel like I'm opinionated, so I don't want to dominate. But it's healthcare,
educators versus VR, so it's literally an antagonistic title. You can say whatever you want.
So this is like a mythological barrier. I'll say that in healthcare, because $1,000, right, for a headset. In healthcare, we spend like I said, $150,000 on a mannequin, which is a piece of plastic. Right. And we stand around it and play a game, essentially, which is a simulation. So if we can, that mannequin needs a room to live in, air conditioning, electricity, it needs peripheral equipment. For the healthcare conversation, $1,000 is nothing. And even if we had 10 of them, once you've got them, they're a 3-year resource, 2 to 3 years. Now, at the K-12 sector, I can totally understand that's a different kettle of fish, right? You're going up against a little bit of video, and if you're going to service that 1,000 students, how many headsets do you get? But for healthcare, I don't see the cost of a headset as a barrier.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it depends what you want to do, like the investment you want to put for how much time it's how the headsets are going to be used. And also what I feel could be done is, not having to buy, but to see if there are other structures in the areas that also have a need for that, and that you could have maybe a common library of equipment, which could make it easier. I mean, it's a whole other issue, but I think that could be interesting also to do.
Yeah, and I do agree, and I do want to be mindful of the fact that different institutions have different access to resources. So I do want to be mindful that this is a huge privilege. VR is a huge privilege. So I guess the most realistic advice I would have is, are you trying to bring the classroom into VR, or are you trying to bring the VR into the classroom? So figuring out that first would sort of, I guess, answer your question of how many VR sets could I or do I need. I think sort of answering that first question is the first step. And then if it's sort of the latter of I want to bring my classroom into VR, that would require more headsets. In that case, I think, as Laura suggested, there should be a more widespread use of like sharing devices and having a common library, I think.
Yeah, I think that higher order thinking, I think you're right there, Eugy, we're probably more talking about scalability, right? Like if I want to teach nurses at the University of Nairobi in Kenya, how are they going to access the headsets, right? But I think some of the hardware companies, in terms of refurbishing and recycling headsets, could do more. Like the HTC Focus Plus, they just moved to the Focus 3, and then where's all the Focus Plus headsets that could maybe be repurposed, right, into regions, low middle income countries, so provide access where they need it. And social VR allows that University of Nairobi, those nurses can then just literally stand next to an expert. They have immediate access that they didn't have before. So yeah, challenges for sure.
Thanks. We have about 10 minutes left. I maybe wanted to ask you to look a little bit into the future, because one thing that's interesting is your 3 case studies are all different in terms of the modalities of deployment. So Laura was, on campus, facilitated physically in the same space, even though not virtually in the same one. Eugy was, if I'm correct, the learners were at home, but it was still kind of like synchronous. And then Brad, the learners were away from where you were as a teacher, since you were in your hospital bed most of the time, but they were together in the classroom. So here's my question. In 5 years, I'm a typical student at your institution, so let's say at Stanford University for Brad. What role does VR play in my curriculum?
I can go first. I think, well, what I think and what I wish for, maybe 2 different things. I'm not quite sure, but I think I like the idea that the students can have access and then go home with the headset and then experience something. The idea of having flipped classrooms as well, which we do have now also with videos and MOOCs and things like that. The idea that, you could maybe go to a learning center in your university or in your school and just borrow a headset, sorry, and then just do the experiment. The word is the same in French, that's why. But so that you're more independent, and that you could just also do things if you want to do them, and not just because you're told, on one hand. And on the other, would be also a whole new way of interacting, like being able to interact with other people outside of class or even during the class. Like right now, a lot of them you're inside of your of your headset, but collaborative mode, I think, are very interesting. Like that's one thing that we're going to work on more, especially considering that we've got campuses throughout France, and that it would be very nice to know that students can speak to one another without that barrier, plus international students that come over and can just maybe get to know people that are on site.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You go, Eugy.
Okay, yeah, I think a few months ago, my answer might have been different, in that when we were taught and teaching virtual people, we didn't have Meta. Meta hadn't changed its name yet. So that happened in the middle of the class. And I think that kind of really changed the perspective of the way people viewed VR, and also the concept of the metaverse. And that also, as a result, changed, I think, the way I viewed classrooms and VR-based education to change. So one thing that I was thinking about is really rethinking, like I said, the boundaries of the classroom. So I can imagine in a more formal class, you would have a very contained, safe environment for students to sort of be with other students. But then now kind of incorporating that whole metaverse perspective, I think, after all, the metaverse is sort of the centralized universe inside a virtual space. So I think, takes away the boundaries that we create for this contained classroom and try to expand that out. So I think kind of in 5 years, if the metaverse does become a more widespread thing that people use and engage with, then I think the classroom will be something that becomes contained, but also involved in a bigger world where we might have the interactions that we crave right now, those sort of chance encounters, bumping into people randomly and having those unplanned interactions. So hopefully that will be your experience if you take the class in 5 years. You use it as a tool, not only for learning in a very contained space, but also learning it for experiential learning in this virtual world.
So we'll have so going from classroom to campus. So will I have the real campus that I can attend if I pay for it, and or the virtual campus. Is that your idea?
Yeah. And there is actually, our lab was interested and has been talking about having like a Stanford campus somewhere in VR as well, something that's available for people to visit as well.
Yeah. I've got, my company is already doing this. So we're sort of building an XR nursing campus. So we're looking at partnering with like nursing schools in places like Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and then linking their accreditation with some partners in the US, big US nursing universities. So you could have, let's just say Mary is a nurse in Sri Lanka, for example. She can attend an XR campus, but the teacher there is actually a teacher from a US university. Now, the education gets done. Obviously, there's going to be English requirements and whatnot. But now Mary, to a degree, has US credentials, but she hasn't really left her lounge room. Now, that's probably pushing the stream. But I think if you're a vice chancellor, obviously money talks, right? Bullshit walks. So the vice chancellor who runs the university has to be worried about his business model, because you've got Coursera, everybody like that, already pulling apart the concept of a degree and providing education. Now you've got your physical space being essentially made worthless. Like lecture theatres and the amount of tech that's in a lecture hall is a lot of money. And now we're saying we don't need lectures because we're going to do it on Zoom. Plus as well, VR's knocking on the door and saying, hey guys, I'm kind of cool, come and use me. And if you're a vice chancellor, the business models, it's getting dicey. I see universities as having a very minimal physical footprint and a larger digital footprint, for sure. And repurposing lecture theatres, hopefully to become live gig venues for bands. But who knows?
Great.
I think students will still want to go on campus though, but yeah, there's something about being physically there that they want to keep in, and a lot of teachers as well, especially after what we've been through the last 2 years.
Yeah, no doubt. But I think there'll be a shift. If universities can minimize their budgets, they will. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I'm saying that's what they will do.
We're gonna have to look into the environmental footprint of all of that at some point as well. I think that would be interesting.
Indeed. I'm realizing that the campus of 10 years from now could be the topic of a 2-week conference. So last question, very simple. Your use cases are fantastic. You were not shy of sharing the challenges as well. And I don't want anyone on here to be scared by it. However, it's good to learn from those who have been there. If you had one piece of advice for educators at the beginning of their journey, where you maybe were a few years ago, what would be that advice?
I'd say don't be scared. Try. Give it a real good try, but don't forget to measure the usefulness, because it's such an investment of your time and of all you're going to have to think about for new modalities in your classroom, that you need to be sure that it will allow your students to acquire the knowledge and transferable skills also to reality, because that's something that's very important. Like, it's nice to do a educational experience, but you also need to make sure that what students are going to take out of it is in fact useful and measurable, and all the evaluation that goes around it. So just don't forget to think about the 360-degree aspect of it.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Okay,
it's so hard to take the social cues on video chat. So I guess one thing that I am most afraid of is, I know VR has so many unique, really cool affordances, but if people don't figure out what they want to teach inside VR, they might abuse it and overuse it for the wrong purposes. And as a result, VR would become sort of this shiny tool that becomes really boring after a while. And then we're kind of really neglecting the powerful use cases of VR. So my advice would be, if you are trying to bring VR into the classroom, or vice versa, bringing the classroom into VR, really figuring out what you want to do, just because if you don't, it will become something that students are excited about for like the first few weeks, and then they'll get super bored with it. And we don't want that to happen, because then that really takes away from the powerful things VR can be used for.
Great. I think, Brad, before you jump in, at the last webinar we did, Michael Davis from George Brown said something like, the worst thing that you can do in VR is do what you do in the classroom. So let's think indeed of what makes it special. Brad, last words.
Probably similar to Laura. Curiosity is the fuel for discovery. Like really, if you're not curious, then you're not going to move. I think having that level of curiosity and inquiry is where you should be. But be fearful. It's not a magic bullet. Be very fearful. There's a lot to learn, that's for sure, as a teacher.
So don't be scared, but still be scared, and kind of be creative, and always think about the learner and what's good for them. Thanks everyone. I'm going to keep you on there. Do one last quick announcement, which is that. So we've created with George Brown College, I just mentioned them, a module as part of a series called Let's Talk About Race. We work with their anti-racism team and their students as well. And the first of those experiences about navigating microaggression, understanding your own and challenging it in others, is out in a few days. And as part of Black History Month, which is starting in 4 or 5 days, we want to make it available for free for anyone. So if you're interested, because it's just a few days away, just check the link in the description of the YouTube and on the chat, and you can scan that QR code, and everyone who wants to try it out will be very happy to send it. And yeah, just it's time. Thanks a lot for everyone. Brad, I'm once again impressed by your dedication to VR. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, my address is here. I would love to be able to share some more knowledge from educators, and we'll be in touch soon for the next webinar. And by the way, if there are amazing people as amazing as the 3 we had today that you want to see on the next webinar, just shoot us an email. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, morning, night, and see you next time. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.